Hello, everybody. Beau Billington again with another episode of Finding That Next Gear. Got Dr. Yishai here. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. I am so excited to be here and I'm honored to be invited to be on your podcast.
Yes, no, thanks for coming. And this is actually our second discussion on my podcast, but fourth overall, as you've had me on your podcast twice
Hmm.
previously. And today we're actually going to talk about fear again. And the initial discussion we had was on the free agent podcast where we discuss fear. And today I really kind of want to talk about fear as it pertains to entrepreneurs and the entrepreneur setting. So again, thanks so much for being on. Really love this discussion. And I know that fear is near and dear, and not necessarily dear, but it's prevalent in all of our hearts.
Hmm. I hope that it becomes a little bit more dear to you and to all of you out there listening. I know that might sound really paradoxical, and we'll get into that.
As the more discussions we have, I'm starting to learn how to harness it and the importance that fear really is.
Hmm.
But prior to jumping into everything, if you can just give us a quick, bio of who you are, what you do, and how specifically you help entrepreneurs in your practice.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm also an adaptability expert and adaptability hacker, as I like to call it. And I also do executive coaching and I do consulting for companies and entrepreneurs. And I really like to do speaking. And I also have my own podcast, The Business Couch with Dr. Yishai, where I really dig into how psychology affects business. And that's both leadership and entrepreneurs, as well as working with your teams, your clients. I mean, psychology is everywhere. And for me, that's really the work that I do. And the way that I help entrepreneurs is I help them really see and understand how is psychology potentially getting in their way or slowing down their growth and their success, and also how they can, in that kind of same way or in that same vein, they can harness that psychology to really expand their growth. Of course, I don't do that as the psychologist when I'm doing coaching and consulting. I really do that more as a coach and consultant.
No, I think that's great. I think, any successful entrepreneur or aspiring successful entrepreneur realizes that self-help is a huge component of the entrepreneur's journey. And I personally try to budget 15 to 30 minutes a day of reading some sort of book that kind of just helps me get closer to my mission. And generally, I feel like it starts from within. So it's
Hmm.
a super cool topic. And thanks again for joining.
Yeah.
So prior to kind of getting into the details here, let's define kind of fear. And I feel like most of us really feel like fear is this archaic emotion. And we talked about this on the other podcast. I believe
Hmm.
specifically we talked about saber-tooth tigers and how it made
Uh-huh.
a lot of sense at that time. But fear's still here. And based upon our previous conversation, you feel like it's still extremely relevant emotion.
Oh, yeah.
It's not archaic. And nor should it necessarily be seen in this negative view that we all tend to kind of see it in. Why is that? Kind of give us your thoughts concerning fear and how it's not archaic, but extremely relevant.
Yeah. So I'm going to take another step back. And I think we need to define what an emotion is. And then we'll get to fear as an emotion. So I think a lot of people make a lot of mistakes or misunderstand in a really fundamental way what emotions are. We tend to think about emotions as consequences. We tend to think about them as a disruptive physiological and mental experience, something that gets in the way of what I want or what I need or what I'm trying to do, especially with fear. And the thing is, from everything that I've learned about emotions, that's completely 180 the wrong way to think about it. In the sense that emotions are actually our brain generating a reaction in our body to help us gain a new awareness, because we need to engage in a new analysis and we need to take a new action, meaning emotions don't show up at random. And I really like to use, a couple of examples. If I were to figure out what your favorite meal is, Beau, and I were to deliver it to you on an extremely busy day,
Right.
would you be angry?
No, I'd be delighted.
You would be, right? There are parameters under which we feel emotions like delight and joy or anger, right? On the other hand, if I, in some way, shape, or form, disrespected you or got in your way or crossed a line of yours, are you going to feel delighted?
No.
No, you'll be angry most likely. You might feel other feelings as well. And so an emotion is actually a process. It is our brain generating a reaction in our body to get us to slow down and stop so that we can, and I know I said it before, I call it the 3 A's. So we can have new awareness, new analysis, and new action. Okay, now let's get to fear. Fear, I like to say, all emotions show up under parameters. Mm-hmm. What are the parameters for fear? Fear shows up when we perceive danger. Right. Now, there are different kinds of fear. I love to say also, emotions come in at least 31 flavors. And you can walk into the kind of
Baskin Robbins,
the metaphorical, yeah. You can walk into the metaphorical Baskin Robbins and really kind of look at and taste. And for many people, fear shows up in slightly different ways. And so it can be hard to actually make sense of it or talk about it in generalities.
100%.
However, when you really drill into it, fear has parameters, even if it shows up in a lot of different types of situations. I like to say there's a difference between fear and anxiety. And the research actually bears this out. Fear shows up more when we experience a clear, present, immediate danger. And it needs to be a kind of danger that's really either to my body, it could be to my finances, it could be to a relationship, but it's really a danger. There's this damage that might just happen in an imminent kind of way.
It's an event that makes you kind of feel it in that moment.
Yeah. And again, that feeling is under these specific parameters. You have a slightly different set of parameters under which anxiety shows up, which is a type of fear, right, perhaps, but might also be distinct. And so what the research shows about anxiety is anxiety shows up when it's not immediate, it's not present, it's not clear. Instead, it's kind of unclear or uncertain. Anxiety shows up in a lot of uncertain situations where there might be something that doesn't go well. It's not directly harmful per se. And those are the conditions or the parameters under which anxiety tends to show up. It's not clear, it's not imminent, it's not present, and it's not exactly danger. It's something that might not go well, and it might have longer term consequences. When people have all of the kind of exploding worst case scenarios in their head, what if this, what if that, what if that, they're sometimes walking down this road of all of what might happen. And again, that's different than fear, because fear is like, oh, my body's in danger, or my bank account is in danger, right? Sure. Or my marriage is in danger, right? So when we think about defining fear, I think it really helps to step back and understand the parameters under which it happens, and also understand that all emotions are a process. They are an adaptive process. It's actually your brain, or a part of your brain that we call the limbic system, which filters every experience you have, all the sensory input, every input from all of the parts of your body and your life. It filters all of that, relates it to your past experiences, your memory, and then starts to tag it. I sometimes call it a snag and tag process.
No, I appreciate that. And also too, I like how you kind of delineated between, fear specifically, as well as anxiety. And you're talking, I was thinking about anxiety and how that's almost like this lingering effect. And it can be there for an hour, 30 minutes. It can be there for a month if you allow it. And so
there's a lot of different flavors
too. And I kind of lump them into the same category. And it sounds like that's not necessarily incorrect, but they're different emotions, where fear is this kind of initial gut response and perhaps reaction. And anxiety is more kind of this mental, oh my gosh, what could happen? Allowing your brain to go on this tangential path about all the negative consequences that you may experience due to, this trigger.
Yeah. And a lot of it's about your perception. And I think we're going to dig a little bit more into that. I can talk about it a little bit now. Sometimes you perceive something that isn't realistic,
right?
That isn't reality based. And again, I said this before, the snag and tag process in our brain uses our past experiences or our memories. And it's not always conscious. In fact, a lot of times it's not conscious as a process, but it's using our past experience to try to predict or anticipate what's going to happen in the future. Our past experiences, though, are not really predictive of the future, though they're actually useful when we know and understand how to contextualize or how to harness them, how to understand them, and then how to apply them and recognize, do they apply in the present or do they not apply in the present? In fact, that's the analysis. When I talk about those 3 A's, the new analysis your emotion's trying to do is it's snagging and tagging, and then it wants you to slow down so that you can do a different kind of analysis or figure out, is this the same? Is it not the same? That's why our emotions keep stopping us in our tracks. And I think fear is a great example of that.
No, so I think that's a phenomenal point as well, because we talked about a negative emotion. That's kind of, how I teed up the question. But you're essentially saying that it can also serve as a reminder that something happened, you received this negative response or this negative situation, and it's the fear in your brain is simply reminding you about what happened. And maybe that's an opportunity for you to kind of change course, and not allow that fear to impact you the way that maybe it had previously. And I think maybe that could be a difference maker with how people leverage fear.
In a sense, I will say I like to reframe fear. Fear is not the thing that's getting in your way. Fear is your brain saying there might be, or there is, or I'm perceiving a danger. And it's kind of like this. Let's imagine you're in a car and the car has no brakes and no steering, and you're headed to the Grand Canyon. What happens when you get there?
You fly off the,
yeah, you're flying off the cliff. There's just no turning, right? So in our lives, our habits are kind of like that car. But where's our steering? Where's our brakes? What process does that? And the answer is it's your limbic system. It's your emotion system. Fear is one of those. When fear stops you in your tracks, guess what fear just did?
Saved your life.
It slammed on the brakes.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Saved your life.
Yeah, because it slammed on the brakes because it perceived and told you need to stop because you're in danger. Now, it's very different to say, I don't want fear to affect me the way it used to, which perhaps just because your fear perceives something doesn't mean it's helpful or it's true. But the flip side of that is, even if I could, I'm going to switch into, the psychologist part of my brain for a moment. I say this to patients all the time. Even if I could surgically remove your fear, I would not do it. It's actually really dangerous to do so. And there are actually some medical cases of that. There's one case of a patient who had damage to their amygdala, the part of their brain that does this snagging and tagging, especially and specifically with fear. And what happened is she was a young woman, maybe her late 20s, early 30s. I still call that young.
Yeah.
And because of that, she could not identify when her body or she was in danger. So she would walk at night through parks that people were constantly getting mugged in.
Oh, wow.
And, some people like to say, or they would say, you're doing it with no fear. Good for you. Well, what's the other side of that?
Yeah.
You don't have the brakes and the steering to tell you. You don't have the awareness. You're struggling, or she was unable to do that. And the doctors were so worried about her that they said, we actually went and hired people to coach her into being able to identify dangerous situations with her thinking brain, because her emotional brain wasn't able to do that because of that damage, right? And imagine that we were, as business people, of course, we need to take risks, right? Entrepreneurs, leaders, running a business involves driving, and sometimes driving at high speeds, right? And at the same time, you need to be able to see or notice, and I would say even harness, when you might be going off a cliff. If you can't tell that, you're going to drive your business straight into the Grand Canyon of failure.
Right. Which obviously is the number one thing you don't want to do, right?
Right. That's
the whole point is to kind of, stay the course, upward and on, and onward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. And so to take that a step further, so we all face fear. Feel fear of failure in an entrepreneurial setting is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I think fear of judgment was a big hurdle that I had to jump, because had a good job, had a nice lifestyle, had a great situation, and it's like,
mm-hmm.
what are you lacking? I was so afraid that people were going to think to themselves, like, what's going on with him and his brain, that he needs to kind of like add some risk to his life. And jump out into corporate America. And so for me, that was a huge hurdle. In fact, I'd say, I had the concept of the free agent for, 3-4 years before I actually jumped out of corporate America, because I was so afraid of course, of failing, big deal, but the judgment as well, because I didn't know many other people, my peers weren't doing that. They weren't starting companies.
And it sounds to me like you experienced the judgment from that.
Yeah, no, I did. And it really, really held me back, and to my detriment. I mean, maybe, the flip side of that coin is that maybe it held me back from jumping out too early. right?
I was going to ask, what did you do during those 3 years that you were kind of mentally planning or investing or thinking about the free agent and you weren't doing it yet? What was happening during those 3 years for you,
Well, I
for
was
the
working
free
behind the
agent?
scenes on the company, the business plan, everything. But I finally got to a point where it was like, what am I doing? This is just busy work. Am I actually going to do something with this, or
Hmm.
am I not? And that's where it kind of went from fear of, like fear of failure, fear of judgment, really kind of reared its head. And I was able to identify that,
Hmm.
hey, there's something that's keeping me back from doing this. I've got these
Sure.
grandiose plans, but I'm doing absolutely nothing to take it from idea and concept to the market.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually dig into the question and kind of share some thoughts that I'm having here. Um, One thing that's coming up for me is if you didn't have a fear of failure, you might not have thought and anticipated and said to yourself, well, I really need to put together a business plan. I need to have a clear idea and goal and direction. In
Right.
other words, you basically built your own business GPS because of that fear of failure. Now, if we were to surgically remove that fear of failure, would you have done those things?
No, and I would have probably jumped out full heartedly, failed, moved in with my
Yep.
mom, and
Right.
you know,
And so there's two sides to this, right? One side of it
totally.
is if you didn't have any fear of failure, then you would never have built out the GPS that's allowed you to build the free agent to what it is today and continue growing it forward, right? And that same process is still operating in a lot of ways. And who says that's bad? Right? To me, that's actually really useful and important to acknowledge because you can harness that.
Yeah.
There's a flip side to that, which is the other side I'm hearing is there is a point or there came a point where that fear of failure was a perception, but the perception was misaligned with reality.
Right.
And if you stay in that situation for a longer period of time, then you are holding yourself back. And so if we dig in a little bit more, it's not how do we get rid of fear of failure, it's how do we harness the
Or
fear.
how do I identify? Because honestly, I don't know how,
Yes.
but I came to a point where literally it was like I told my wife, I was like, I've gotten the business 80% of where I can get it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never get to 100%, but I
Mm-hmm.
need to be at 90%, and I can't get that extra 10% unless I jump out of corporate America.
Mm.
But honestly, I could have envisioned myself kicking the can until even today because it's so
Mm-hmm.
easy just to keep doing things, below the radar and
Mm.
not introducing risk to your situation.
Yeah. So, it's one thing to introduce risk with intention, and it's another thing, to take your car over the Grand Canyon,
Right.
right? And so the whole point and the idea here is, and you said it, how do you get aware? How do you identify what that fear is trying to do for you, when it's useful, how it's useful, and in what way or ways it may not be as useful any longer? And
Yes.
a lot of that is, from my perspective, so I'll say a couple of things. One, I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I may be a psychologist, but I'm not your psychologist, you, Beau, or, of course, you, the audience, you listener. And so make sure you do your own research and don't just take what I'm saying at face value. The second thing I'm going to say is there is a skill. There's a really important skill. A lot of people lean away from fear. Like I said, a lot of people, when they speak to me, whether they're patients or clients or, I'm doing consulting, they're like, can you just help me get rid of the fear? Or can you help me get rid of my anger? Can you help me get rid of my anxiety? And I often say, we don't want to get rid of it. We want to help you learn to work with it. Remember that kind of near and dear with the fear, right? We want fear to be near and dear to you, not in a way that it's holding you back, in a way that you understand it and it can be helpful to you, right? What I'm saying is we all have a relationship with ourselves, with our emotions, including our fear. And for many people, because they blame or they stick the finger, they point the finger at fear and says they say the fear is holding me back. Well, if that thing's holding me back, then I got to get rid of it. And that makes a relationship with fear where I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to ever experience it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? Your fear, its job is to protect and take care of you, your business, your company, right? Your family. It has deeply important jobs. And if it's not fulfilling that job, yeah, there's danger to you. There is very real danger. And so the goal here is not to reject or get rid of the fear. The goal here is to get nearer and to have a relationship that's more dear with the fear. And so if you're asking how, I'll give you a couple of recommendations. One is consider therapy and or coaching. And it could be one or the other. It depends. Sometimes there's personal stuff or stuff from our upbringing or stuff from past experiences that's really affecting us. Well, that needs to get addressed. And that's a really hard thing to do if you're not in front of somebody who is trained to do that. And it's really important to be intentional about that, right? One thing that you shared, Beau, is that your experiences with people judging you about your idea, the free agent, leaving corporate America, it has stuck with you.
Yeah.
And that experience continues to be a part of what you anticipate, how you think, even how you process or perceive the world around you. Well, of course, that's going to be really difficult. That may even get in the way. So it's really important to be willing to do the work on that. And that work is not going to be easy. And it's really hard to do on your own sometimes. Can you do that work on your own? Yes. If you want, I'll give you a bit of a framework for that. I can even share some handouts with you in the audience and all of you listening.
That'd be great.
So that you can start to kind of walk yourself through that.
Yeah, I think it would be great. I think handouts. And yeah, I mean, so fear of judgment for me, and I want to kind of get into this here in a moment. It was bigger on the onset. And then when I actually jumped out, started my company, it kind of lessened over time. And now, I'm approaching 5 years with my company. I'd say once I hit about the 2.5 to 3 year mark, maybe it was 3.5, that judgment completely subsided. Now, part of that was due to, finding success, validating the business model, things like that basically, helped me kind of neutralize that judgment. But also I think part of that was due to the reps, like repetitions and encountering the judgment over and over, having the ability to kind of overcome it verbally, but also having the proof points. And so, how do you feel about, you hear about, lean into your fear, and if you don't like public speaking, then you should do more of it, right? I mean, is there some relevance, and is there some validity behind that thinking? Because it seems like in my situation, that's kind of how I've overcome a lot of this and just push through it, putting your head through a brick wall.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the just push through it or just do it, because again, I look at how do you think about and relate to this emotion? Is it near and dear, or are you trying to make it go away? Are you treating it like it's unwelcome and doesn't belong? And so I like to think about it differently. The way I think about it, and with this will come the framework and the PDF, the worksheet I'm happy to share with you in the audience. We want, and I would want to shift and change how you look at and respond when fear shows up. What if when fear shows up, you really understood and you can extract critical data, understand the direction that it's trying to help you accomplish, work towards, get to, or maybe trying to protect or prevent? And what if you could actually extract motivation, drive out of that? What if it could give you more and better direction? What if it could even give you greater motivation? Well, you can do that. In order to do that, you need to lean in, not push through or push away, right? It's kind of like if you got a best friend, or if it's your partner or a business partner, right? If you got someone and they're rooting for you and they give you a piece of feedback, they're like, dude, if you go in this direction, you are going to crash and burn. Are you going to punch that person and be like, get out? I'm just going to keep doing it. What's that going to do for your relationship with them? Right. And let's say that they're incredibly dedicated. They never give up on you. How are they going to respond back?
That's a great point.
Right. Yeah. So why do we treat our fear any differently? Because ultimately its job is to protect and ensure that you, your business, your relationships, that you are protected, safe, and even moving forward, but not going off the cliff. Right? It's the steering and the gas and the brakes. So I would say you really need to shift that process. And here's the framework that I have that I'm happy to share with you. I'll give you worksheets so you can share it. The framework, I call it the 3D adaptation framework. The 3Ds are data, direction, and drive. So whenever fear pops up, and it's an exercise you can do on a daily basis with any emotion, and we'll stick with fear for the moment. I'll walk you through how you do that with fear.
We'll probably need to do anxiety next time, but keep going.
Yeah, sure. So the first place to start is to ask yourself, what data is this emotion trying to give me? Mm-hmm. And that includes, what is the perception? What might happen? I mean, really dive into all the data that this emotion gives you. It can also help to take a step back, and I'll do this with you and for all of you listening. Fear shows up. We talked about the parameters. When do people get afraid? When they perceive danger. Is that useful? Much of the time, yes. Sometimes that perception is not aligned with reality. That's why we need data. You need to compare your data with reality, right? So collect that data. What is my fear trying to tell me? What are all the dangers? What might happen? What are the outcomes? We actually lean into, I say you want to lean into all the what ifs. You want to lean into the catastrophes, but you don't want to just do that, right? You need to take that data and compare. You really do want to walk into all those things. So my fear might say, I might call someone up and they laugh at me, and then I don't get a client. And then it might happen every time I reach out to a client. And then if that happens, I'll never get any revenue. I'll never book any clients. And if I don't book any clients, my business is going to be a failure, and I'll keep draining my bank accounts, and I won't be able to support my family. And then my family is going to be homeless, and we'll lose our house, and we'll have to live in our car, and then we'll have to sell our car. Just go all the way down that road, all the fears. Okay. And I would even recommend grab a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and write every one of those things. Write every single one of those things down. In fact, this is an exercise that's well known in Stoicism. You write out all of your fears. And then on the other side of the page, rate them on a 0 to 10, how likely that is to happen. Now we're getting realistic. Now we're actually analyzing this data. How likely is it that if one person rejects me, everybody's going to reject me? Is that logical? No. Is that realistic? No. Okay. 0, right? How likely is it that if I don't get this client, I'm going to never make any money in my business?
Not logical.
Right. 0. But maybe we'll say 1. If it keeps happening, that's problematic. Or if I don't make any changes, or if I'm doing something the wrong way or barking up the wrong tree, right, then maybe that won't be helpful. So that's actually going to lean into the direction piece, because your fear is actually trying to help direct you. And we'll get to there in a moment. But you go down this whole list and you start rating them and really analyze that. That's the whole point of the data. If you didn't have your fear, you would never be able to see any of these things. We would all just keep driving off the cliffs. Right?
I think this is great though. When you're first talking though, you're talking about all the different fears that you have, the anxiety, and literally that was my thought process 6 years ago. It's like, oh my gosh. And so I could completely relate, because that's what your brain says. And then you started kind of, quantifying, the probability or the possibility of them actually happening. And it kind of it detached me from it a little bit, where like, yes, it's possible. Is it probable? Not really,
And you can even,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, of course. And I'll say even one step further, you could even say, under what conditions would X lead to Y? Would me not getting this client lead to me not getting any clients?
Right.
Because again, that thought process will perhaps even help mitigate or shift over. You can ask yourself, is this my ideal kind of client? If I keep chasing the kind of client who's not interested in my product, is my business likely to succeed? Maybe not. Right. That fear, and we're leaning into the direction side for a moment. Again, we'll come back to it. I wanted to say, I think, again, when our relationship with fear, when the way we think and believe about fear is that the fear itself is a problem, that all my what ifs are actually working against me, then what do you do when they show up? Well, you keep trying to make them go away. But what does the emotion keep doing? It keeps shoving it in your face because it's trying to protect you.
There's an issue, right? And maybe in a business setting, it could be leveraged to help you pivot. Right.
Yes. And that
fear keeps appearing. So maybe I'm the problem. Maybe there's something else that I need to be doing. So it's not presented anymore.
Exactly. And again, that's why I say you don't need to push past your fear. You want your fear to be near and dear to you. You want to treat it like not just a welcome guest, but an honored guest. I say this about emotions. Treat all your emotions as if they're an angel sent from heaven, and welcome them in like they're an honored guest, I would say the president of the United States, but people have very conflicting relationships depending on when they're listening to this and who the president is. But treat them like royalty when you invite them, and invite them into your home, invite them into your heart, into your brain. And then get curious about them like you're a scientist. Because we judge our emotions so hard.
No, I think it's fascinating. And on the original podcast that we did, I mentioned that I personally was so, concerned with fear, anxiety, that I literally actively was trying to kind of make my life devoid of it. And since I've kind of realized that it's a trigger that helps me identify that, something is going on, there's some sort of catalyst out there that's making me think. But to kind of look at this a little bit differently, how do you actually identify when fear or anxiety is present? Because one of the things I would consider myself an extrovert. One of the things that I loathe doing is networking. Yet networking is so critical to my business. If I'm not doing it, my brand's not getting out there. People don't know I exist. They don't know to call me, right? So as the kind of the face of my company, part of my charter is to get my brand out there, get out, shake hands, kiss babies, etc. And there was a period of when my business was growing, but I got very comfortable sitting at home and not going to these networking events because I loathed them so much. But I was unable to identify what was really going on. And again, similar to kind of jumping out, I feel like I got lucky that at some point I just kind of identified that, hey, this may be holding me back and I've got to fix it and right the ship. Yeah. But I was unable, again, I just kind of uncovered that maybe this was holding me back from success. And once I identified it, I was able to write the course. But how could somebody actually identify that maybe it's fear or it's anxiety or it's something that's allowing them to focus on what's easy and stay away from what's hard? Because that's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to come back to something I said is your emotion system. I call it your adaptive brain, and I call it your adaptive brain for a reason. It's there to generate that new awareness, new analysis, and new action. What I'm hearing from you is the difficulty identifying it came from a place of trying to get rid of it instead of slowing down and welcoming it in. The question is, how do you welcome it in? How do you tap or tune into it? And there's a lot that goes into that. And so I'm going to say, this is the reason that I started both my podcast, The Business Couch with Dr. Yishai, and my coaching and consulting company, because people don't know how to do that. And I'm going to be honest, the how to do it is not going to get you from step 0 all the way to 100. It's not going to get you there. It is consistent effort. You talked about kind of self-development. Self-development happens in increments. You need to dedicate the time, energy, and effort. I will also say having a guide, someone who can help you learn or develop that skill, I think is absolutely critical. So it's not an easy thing to do. And again, what I'm going to come back to is the framework and the worksheet, which is you need to be willing to take it in instead of just brush it off and try to reject it. When you were loathing.
That's what I did. I mean, literally, I did this with the company for like 3 years because it's not, now is not the right time.
Yeah. So
networking, that's not the right time.
So the thing to do is you need to stop brushing it off, right? And for any of you out there, just take a moment. I want you to ask yourself, really be brutally honest with yourself. When you feel something, especially something uncomfortable, do you brush it off or do you slow down, recognize and relate to it like it's near and dear, recognize it's there to generate new awareness, new analysis, and new action? And do you really invest the time to listen to it like it is your business partner, your best friend, right? Your guide, because it really is your guide, right? I don't think of myself as the guide for my clients. It is their own adaptive brains that is their guide. I just help them tap into that. And I think that's really key. So the process there is you want to do this data work. You want to slow down so you can get this data, do the analysis, and then with all of that analysis, you can be intentional and select your new direction. Ask yourself, what is my fear trying to protect me from? What does it want for me instead of what is it doing to me? People get so stuck in what is my fear doing to me that they want that to go away.
Right. But I love how you flipped it. What is it doing for me?
Yes.
And I want to underscore what you mentioned. I mean, to me, what I've kind of heard is it's an iterative process, learning how to deal and identify it. But also too, taking a moment to sit back and think about what your fear is. And I've started journaling recently, which could just be anything. It's 10, 15-minute exercise, whatever. But I'm trying to kind of sit down and think about, all right, what's going on in my business? Where are my gaps? Think through it, and then think about, am I doing something? And 9 out of 10 times it's me, right? And just like any other entrepreneur, I mean, you yourself are your worst enemy. But I think it's great.
And your greatest asset.
Yeah, totally. But I'm sitting back and trying to identify where the gaps, what's holding me back, write those down, and then think through those, kind of using the process that you mentioned earlier. So that's I mean, to me, that's an actionable insight, and I greatly appreciate you sharing that. And so it seems like I'm on the right path. Again, I think I just fell backwards into it, and maybe it's due to all the self-help books that I read. But it's a journey, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. A lot of not only self-help, but self-development and a lot of business coaching out there, they really dump on our emotions. And again, I think what all they're doing is teaching you to hamstring your own adaptive brain. They're teaching you to dislike or try to get away from. And again, all this language, it drives me nuts when people say you need to just push past the fear.
Right.
Pushing past the fear is like saying, when your business partner tells you that the business is at risk, go punch them in the face, push them out of the way, and do whatever you think your business is supposed to do. I mean, seriously? Really?
Right.
Really? It drives me absolutely nuts. And that's why I say, and I hope that as we're having this conversation, as we're talking about it, you're understanding, and those of you listening, you're really getting to recognize that your fear really deeply cares about you. It's not trying to get in your way. It's trying to protect you. And if you treat it like near and dear, and if you learn how to harness it, because it's trying to help you adapt, which is a challenge, I will acknowledge that. And of course, like any skill, whether you're learning to ride a bike or you're learning how to do marketing or writing copy, or you need to learn how to do networking, the first time is not going to be easy. And not every time you go to do it, is it going to work perfectly.
Right.
Not only is that okay, it's more about the process and the growth than it is about flipping a switch from being bad at it to being great at it.
I think that's great. I think that's phenomenal. And again, it's giving me some great tidbits that it's an iterative process. It's all about identifying and then figure out how you can kind of maybe change the course, because it is there present and telling you something. And I think it's a great segue into, fake it until you make it. I know everybody's heard this. And it's something that I've tried to adopt, and utilize in the real world. And what are your thoughts in regards to kind of that thought process? Because to me, that kind of goes hand in hand with maybe kind of trying to put your head through a brick wall and just, alleviating the fear, pushing past the fear. And maybe it's not that simplistic. Maybe there's situations in which that makes the most sense. Maybe there's times where it doesn't. But what are your thoughts in regards to kind of fake it until you make it? Because it's worked for me in certain situations, i.e. networking, continuing to show up, public speaking events, continue to do them. It's gotten easier and easier and easier.
Yeah. So I'm going to say differently. I think, and as you pointed out, and I think research actually shows this, faking it till you make it doesn't always work. In fact, a lot of times it doesn't. And it can actually contribute to a mindset where you consistently feel like you're not there and you don't really belong and you're not really someone who's good at this, or that you're not really capable. You just have to keep faking it. So I'm going to reframe and rephrase that. My way of thinking about it is try until you identify. Try until it's part of your identity. It's not about faking it. It's not about making it. It's not about one day waking up and suddenly you are that. I'm willing to try. I'll keep putting it in. I'm going to slow down and pay attention to when my emotion system, my adaptive brain, is trying to help me address something or anticipate something. And that's not going to stop me from continuing. In fact, I'm going to harness it. And we're going to get back to we talked about direction, how it can help direct you. Do you need to turn? Do you need to brake? We're going to say drive as well. Your fear is a big drive. Your anger is a big drive. Your frustration is a big drive, right? Your desire is a big drive. These are all emotions. They're also your adaptive brain.
Right.
And a lot of it is about being tuned in. So that the concept of faking it till you make it can really create this mindset that either you are it or you're not.
Maybe you're an imposter.
And that the research is actually showing that it can contribute to or even create imposter syndrome. Wow. And that's, yeah, to me, that's not only mind blowing, it's like, oh, we had this wrong. And it
Detrimental.
doesn't,
Yeah. So no, I like how
right.
it flipped in the script too. And I feel like with you, a lot of it is just perception, right? And so it's coming. You literally kind of did a 180 with the fake it till you make it. It's like, try until you identify. I think that's staggering, and I never thought about that. But maybe you continue to try to fake it until you make it. You never make it, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you feel like, well, it's a me problem, and maybe there was something else that was going on outside of your control.
Yeah, and there's a lot of subtlety there. I like to say and this is where I kind of draw on my background in psychology, which is how we relate to our thoughts, to our feelings, to ourselves, and to our sense of selves really makes a massive difference in the long term. It really, really does. So the thing about fake it till you make it is fake it till you make it is like there's this idea of what you're supposed to be or how you're supposed to do. And you're just trying to emulate that as if emulating it is suddenly going to give you all this skill. But try until you identify is try something. If it doesn't work, you can tinker with it. It doesn't have to go perfect, right? And then you keep going and going, all right? It's try, iterate, tinker, and you do that over and over and over again. And the thing that you try over and over and over again, and you continue trying becomes part of how you identify, how you see yourself in the long term. It's a very different process. It's not that I need to be this person or be this way. It's, I want to try this thing. I want to expand or push myself further, or I have a mission, I have a goal, I have a dream. And in order to accomplish that, I need to take some action. And my emotions along the way, oh, they're going to show up and they're going to try to help me. They're going to give me some data. They're going to try to direct me and they're going to drive me. And sometimes they're going to slam on the brakes. Other times they're going to slam on the gas. And the whole point here is to shift how you relate to those things, because how you relate to them really affects not only how you think, but how you make your decisions and how you then perceive the results or outcomes of it. And then how you also perceive yourself along the whole way.
That's great. So what I'm hearing too is that it's an iterative process, like anything in life,
Surprise.
iterate, kind of, take some notes, try to fix it, keep iterating over and over until you get better. All right. Last question for you, Doc. Appreciate your time. If you were to give an entrepreneur one piece of advice in order to harness and conquer their fears, what would it be? One piece of advice.
One piece of advice. I'm going to take a moment and think.
Of course, I'm putting you on the spot. I realize that.
Start thinking about fear as a friend, not as an enemy. You don't need to conquer your fear. You want your fear to be a part of you. Join your fear. That doesn't mean you're a slave to it.
Right.
But this kind of like conquer or be a slave to, master, manage, this is a very power dynamic with your fear. And that's not going to get you to where you want or need, because it's not going to let you tap into your fear. And your fear, in many ways, not only is trying to help, but it is helpful. So work on shifting that relationship. Harnessing your fear is not about, sticking a saddle on it and riding it. It's about inviting it in, having an interactive conversation with
Absolutely.
it, like we talked about before, right? And I'll give you a link and you'll be able to get the worksheet so that you can do the 3D exercise. And that's a way of really shifting that relationship with your fear. If your fear is a source of data, do you need to get rid of it?
No, in fact, you need to ask it, right?
That's the thing. Yes. And that's what my advice would be. Start asking, get curious, build a different kind of relationship with your fear and with any other emotion. And if you need any help, I'm happy to be here and in any way that I can really kind of help you along the process.
I appreciate that. And how can folks reach you?
Yeah. So best way to reach me is there are two ways. One is my website, dyishai.com, DRYISHAI.com. And the other way is through LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, Doc, really appreciate you coming on, not once, but twice. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Until next time.
My pleasure.